I say violence is necessary. Violence is a part of America's culture. It is as American as cherry pie. America taught the black people to be violent. We will use that violence to rid ourselves of oppression if necessary. We will be free by any means necessary.
I remember really distinctly the day that I walked down a hall at school, and there was a poster on the bulletin board, and it was a leaflet that had been put out by a black community group in Chester, Pennsylvania, that was fighting for integrating the schools. The word around was that people were going to be arrested, and I remember standing and staring at that leaflet and knowing absolutely that this was the time when I had to make a decision in my life. If I got arrested, I knew what the consequences were. I knew in terms of everything I had been programmed to do for the rest of my life.
I hope I haven't put anybody on the spot. I'm not intending to try and stir you up and make you do something that you wouldn't have done anyway. I pray that God will bless you in everything that you do. I pray that you will grow intellectually so that you can understand the problems of the world and where you fit into in that world picture. And I pray that all the fear that has ever been in your heart will be taken out. And when you look at that man, if you know he's nothing but a coward, you won't fear him. If he wasn't a coward, he wouldn't gang up on you. He wouldn't need to sneak around here. This is how they function. They function in mobs. That's a coward. They put on a sheet so you won't know who they are. That's a coward. The time will come when that sheet will be ripped off. If the federal government doesn't take it off, we'll take it off.
My name is Bernadine Dorn. One of the first political things I remember growing up is watching the Army McCarthy hearings on television, watching my mother ironing day after day and watching these hearings. My parents were Midwest Republicans. They voted for Joe McCarthy. And it wasn't until 8 years later that these ideas began to be really challenged for me. But I knew that taking the first step would change my life. And I hesitated for a long time. The first demonstration I took part in was an anti-HUAC demonstration. And then increasingly, I became involved in organizing work in Chicago and joined the open housing drives for equal housing rights that took place on the west side of Chicago in 1966.
We're going to march with the force of our souls, mobilize bodies in concern for justice. And somehow we're going to step out here tomorrow. We're going to take the ammunition of determination. We're going to move out with the weapons of courage. We're going to put on the breastplate of righteousness and the whole armor of God, and we're going to march over this city. And this is it.
Black people of Chicago demonstrated day after day and weekend after weekend by marching into neighborhoods that they were not allowed to live in all over Chicago. And what they elicited from these marches was the kind of blatant, open, violent racism that you see today in Boston, in any city in the United States. And by this time I was a law student, and I joined the National Lawyers Guild. At the height of the student movement, I joined SDS. This was long after I was a student myself. I was elected National Officer of SDS and had the opportunity of meeting with the Vietnamese and the Cubans. This experience in particular made me a full-time revolutionary and really changed my own idea of myself and what the revolution was going to be.
La revolución es un profundo problema de conciencia. La revolución es un profundo cambio de estructura social. Una revolución triunfa cuando un pueblo en su inmensa mayoría toma conciencia real de lo que es la revolución. Toma conciencia real de los cambios que se hacen y toma conciencia real de los objetivos que se buscan. Ser comunista no es solo tener una actitud intelectual, una actitud racional ante los problemas. Hay que tener un sentimiento en ese sentido. Hay que tener una vocación revolucionaria. Yo tenía la vocación revolucionaria. Si usted no tiene vocación, no es capaz de sentir pasión por algo. Si usted no tiene vocación, no es capaz de luchar ciertamente por algo. Yo recuerdo que el problema del imperialismo mismo lo entendía de una manera propiamente intelectual. Me pasa en cierto sentido como le ha pasado a muchos jóvenes norteamericanos que solo recientemente han tenido una percepción real de los problemas que les ha hecho tomar posiciones políticas determinadas.
My name is Kathy Boudin. I grew up in New York in a family that was a left family and taught me a lot about the questions of justice and injustice in the United States. Even though I had understood a lot about the problems of the United States, if you only know the problems, you can become very cynical. And when I went to Cuba, I was very skeptical. I was very skeptical that a new kind of society would be possible. And there I felt the tremendous enthusiasm and possibilities and hope that socialism means for the people in Cuba and for people around the world. I remember on January 2nd, 1961, I was 17 years old, standing in downtown Havana, surrounded by 1 million people, 1 million Cubans that had come to Havana to celebrate the Cuban Revolution. At the end of the 6 or 7 hours of people celebrating came a long military parade with guns and weapons and tanks. I had been cheering along with everybody else. Suddenly I realized that I was cheering for tanks and for guns, which is something that was completely opposite to what I had been brought up to do. My Cuban friend that was standing next to me saw my eyes fill up with tears, and he looked at me and he said, "I understand what you're feeling. We don't like to have guns and weapons either, but it's your country that makes us have to do this." 3 months later, the Bay of Pigs invasion occurred, and I understood what he meant.
My name is Billy Ayers. My political history begins in the student movement and the youth movement, the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement. In 1965, when the anti-war movement was just beginning, shortly after Johnson invaded Vietnam, several of us who were students made a decision, along with, I think, really hundreds and thousands of people at that point, that the anti-war movement had to apply the tactics and the confrontational methods of the civil rights movement.